Welcome, Sibongile Mkhabela. It's so beautiful to have you here. And today we are celebrating you as an invisible giant. I should say as a living legend.
Oh my goodness.
We could say a lot of things about you, but I think let's take things backward and let's talk about today. I know you've been involved in a lot of things, but today, tell us about what you are working on, what you're involved in with the storytelling work and all that, and why you think it is so important that we build a whole, different narrative. And how you see that and how people can get involved in that, because it's important, it's work that you're doing, and we need more people, more voices, more resources towards this. So we start with today.
Thank you for sitting with me. I'm overwhelmed by the honor, absolutely overwhelmed. I'm trying to figure out how it came to be, or how I even came to the attention of Africans Rising. But I'm grateful. I have a view that it's intended to propel my work forward, that the attention that you give me, you actually give it to the important, or the things that I think are important. Others might think differently, but those are things I think are important. And so I'm grateful. I'm overwhelmed, but I'm grateful. As I sit now, I've had an absolutely amazing opportunity to establish a foundation that focuses on young people, women, and communities that have historically been deprived. So you really are often working with people who've been deprived of opportunities, options, possibilities. The view of the world has been narrowed over time. And we decided with a group of us that in many instances, we found it would be easy for us to say we're going to focus on education, we're going to focus on health. Those are the things that would happen. And those are things that often we think we can do, and the opportunities will come as a result thereof. We thought maybe let's paddle back a little bit. Let's not make those very important areas the focus. Let's make the people who would benefit, who really are the actors. Let's put them back at the center. And then we can, with them, make the choices. Is it education? Is it health? Is it something else? We could still go traditional, but we wanted to just stop, take a pause. And we chose, we will tell stories. We won't tell the stories, it's wrong for me to say so. We will enable people to walk themselves into their past, to walk where their grandmothers, great-grandmothers, forefathers have walked. And in the reason we want them to do that is so when they come to the present day, they come with all of themselves, all of who they are. And we believe there will be lots of struggles. There will be people who survived untold pain and suffering. There'll also be people who had amazing victories. And that's who they are today when they arrive. Now, the Western world has taught us to look at ourselves individually. I'm Zulu. And when we greet in a plural. So when we greet, when we say how are you, we don't mean you. We mean how are you and the people with whom you come and the people you represent. And we thought in this development work, often we have taken the Western perspective that often narrows our focus on the community. We talk about community, but even then, we're still wanting to talk about the woman, the child. We wanted to talk about everything. And so the storytelling, which we started with, is we got some of our young, because our beneficiaries are young. So we thought, let's, at the very beginning, let's start with the skills that are sitting with young people. So there are those who are in filmmaking. There are those who are telling stories, young and old. There are women who are in storytelling. And there are those who are doing photography. So we invited those, and they came to enable people to tell their stories. So they went to the provinces, they went to the various communities, and they created the capacity for people to tell the story. Where they could hand over the mic, they handed over the mic, you know, to the people with whom they were working with. And that's the storytelling. So in so doing, we've collected a lot of stories, beautiful stories. But more importantly, we've done what we thought we wanted to do. We've gotten people to actually reflect on who they are and what they represent and what they are capable of. If, for example, you come out of a community that has given birth to some of our international musicians like Miriam Makeba, she comes out of exactly the same kind of community you come with technology as an advantage. Why wouldn't you do that? So they silently see their worth, affirm themselves. And once they've affirmed themselves, they begin to ask the question, why not? And so our development program builds on the why not. And the way we articulate it in the work I'm doing now, we're saying we're not starting anything new. We call it blowing into the embers of fires that people have built. So that's all we do. We blow into the embers. It's not our fire. We don't even want to own it. It's their fires, and their stories are the fires, are the wood that feeds this fire. And all what we're doing as people coming from outside is really a little blow, and the fires grow.
It's such a beautiful image, really, to me. And collecting those stories or telling stories or exchanging stories are, of course, for me, a tool of rebuilding communities, because many times those stories are not even told for other people to hear. It's for each other, because the more you hear it, the more you know your link with others in the community is just amazing and fantastic.
The more you know who you are.
The more you know who you are.
Because when we talk about colonization and so on, we focus on the big things, the economy and so on. We forget that actually the colonial project, its main aim was to change how we see ourselves.
Yes, erasure
of who we are, to an extent that you change your lenses.
Yes.
You look at yourself from the lens of the colonizer.
So true.
So when, for example, I introduce myself, I'm Sibongile Mkhabela, I have said in the African way, I have not even begun to introduce myself.
That's
when I haven't told you who my clan is, who my parents are, where they come from. Because whenever we introduce ourselves, as I said, we are always in a collective. We introduce our whole selves. The mediums we use, the way we think about ourselves now, it's exactly the way it would appear in your identity document. Your name and your surname, and that's it. Anything else is extra.
Thank you. Listen, we're working backward. We talked about today and the foundation and the work around storytelling and in the work in the communities. But before that, you led this amazing foundation the hospital, the work on health, the work for children. And I think it's a model. It's something that people all over the continent need to know about, and need to know that, you know, people came together to make it happen. So it's possible. So please tell us, and of course, as much as you can tell us, people have to go and see. But tell us more about the Children's Hospital, how it came about, what you did, and what is there. What is it?
You know, we call it the Nelson Mandela Children's Hospital. One, because we started it with Dr. Nelson Mandela.
Yes.
And he was a great champion.
Champion, yeah.
But he was a champion because he watched me personally go through a tragedy of losing my son.
Yes.
And when my son was lying in hospital, I spent a lot of time with doctors. I spent a lot of time helping nurses understand how to communicate with a 5-year-old who can speak for himself.
Mm.
And I got to appreciate how little focus is there on children. We treat children as if they were little adults.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not little adults, they're children. They matter when they're 5 and how their worldview matters.
Yeah.
So I spent that time with 30 days in the ICU.
Mm-hmm.
And in those 30 days in the ICU, I got to know his doctors by name.
Mm.
I got to understand their struggles. I also got to see one moment that touched me. As you know, you spend a lot of time at ICU, so you see a lot of things. And when I saw a little girl, she must have also been about 5, and she was on a bed in ICU. And when she was unconscious, she had been a victim of a car accident. When she got up, I cannot forget how shocked she was.
Mm.
When she opened her eyes, it was beyond a child waking up and crying.
Mm-hmm.
It was a child terrified.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I looked around, what was it?
Yeah.
And there were a number of people around this child who were in an ICU
Mm-hmm.
and therefore hooked up in all kinds of
machines.
The breathing was difficult. When this child's last moment was crossing a road, and the next moment is confronted by the scene, and I naturally then go and ask, why do we have a child in the same place with adults? And I'm told, oh, that's how it
Always
how it
did.
works. It's always, but how are we going to deal with that trauma of just waking up and finding that situation? But no, we do not have special wards for children when they're in ICU. Your son is in an isolation because of his condition.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, he would be lying in the same space as everybody else. And that became another moment for me to carry and to go back and share with my board.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I shared with my board what I saw, what I learned.
Mm-hmm.
Even after we lost the battle and we lost him,
Mm-hmm.
he left me with a mission.
Mm.
As he left me with a mission. And it was as many children as possible should not go through what he's gone through. As many African children as possible should not go through. And Dr. Nelson Mandela, who was at that time my boss, so to speak, was, and I knew he was trying to get me out of grief when he said, so what are we going to do? And the doer in me kicked in.
Yes, yes,
yes.
yes.
I love to do.
Yep.
What are we going to do?
Yeah.
And we initiated the establishment of the Nelson Mandela Children's Hospital for Africa, starting with Southern Africa. The hospital from the beginning, its sense is that it would be a center of excellence for Africa's children. Of course, you know, it took us about 10 years of planning, researching, comparing, asking ourselves the question, because now as it gets bigger, it's terrifying. And so you start saying, but should we really be doing this? You ask yourself the question. And the more you talk to pediatricians, the more you know it has to be done. And the fact that they volunteered their time, the Nelson Mandela Children's Hospital project had probably over 100 volunteers on different aspects. The doctors volunteered their times, researchers volunteered their times, financial model people reduced their
fees.
So everything we did in the name of children and trying to create something that was for children. It took us, the 10 years was spent, 5 of that was in just research. And we did thorough research. We spoke to universities. We traveled the world. We came to understand that Canada, with its population of about 20 million, had no less than 17 children's hospitals. When I remember going to New York and I thought, oh, I'm here now, why don't I see a children's hospital? They said, which one? Do you want to see the Cancer Center for Children, or do you want to see which of the children's hospitals
so many
that we have? Because it's how they couldn't fathom how we treat children when we don't have facilities that are dedicated to children. I think there were over 200 children's hospitals in the US, all of it in all the states. And then in the continent, we could find 2 in Egypt, one a cancer center and the other a general children's pediatric center. We knew that Ghana was working on a children's hospital. We knew Kenya, where Directrice Children's Hospital. So you could count no less than 5. In South Africa, for a population of over 50 million people, we had 1 children's hospital in Cape Town. In fact, when my son was hurt, and when I got there and the paramedics got there, I said, get him to the children's hospital. Even I, who had worked on children's issues all my life, I had not understood that there was no children's hospital. So the paramedic says to me, but ma'am, we can't fly him to Cape Town, it's too far, he won't survive. So, but I don't mean, why would you do that? Don't fly him to Cape Town. Send him to Johannesburg Children's Hospital. I said, but it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. And I thought, the next mother who's sitting at that place at that time like I did would be able to say, send him to a children's hospital, and there will be a children's hospital because we tried. We also understood that we were not going to do it alone. So all the people, the 100 volunteers we mobilized, was also a testament of, is it worth doing? And the next thing of, is it worth doing, was the money. Where's the money going to come from? And over 60% of the money came from South Africa.
Wow.
Initially, we thought money would come overseas, but actually money came from our own people.
Wow.
People understood and they contributed. It was not small. It was when we finished with the financial model and looked at the training, at the center of excellence it was going to be, because the doctors convinced us and researchers pointed out that it can be a primary health care. That primary health care was okay, but that it needed to be a tertiary quaternary service. So in that case, it means that you are looking at the very top of medical health care. It is going to be expensive. The machinery is going to be expensive. And so the total cost at that time was $100 million US.
Wow.
And all the $100 million US, the big portion came out of an endowment we had built within the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund. And thank God that we had that ability to think far as the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund and decide to create capacity to invest in children.
Yep.
And so we use this portion of this money, I think it was about a third of its endowment, to build the children's hospital.
Wow.
And at the same time rebuild the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund monies. When I finally left, we had rebuilt it to where it was. It was sitting at $100 million as well.
That's amazing.
$100 million. we had spent so much money to build the children's hospital, and also at the same time think about its sustainability and how we would ensure that it's sustained over time. Yeah, that's the story.
Wow. That's a beautiful story. See, these are the stories we need to hear, the stories of success, the stories of making things happen. I need another story. You talked about, the work you're doing today, the Children's Hospital, but you've also worked in, in politics, or be in I want to say, in seats of power, if I can call it so, because today we look at women representation in executive spaces, whether it's government, whether it's labor union, whether it's business, even at community level. What we see and know is that most of the time women are capable, they do the work, they are there.
Yeah.
They're humble most of the time. They're not trying to be seen. Yeah. They're not always try to, elbow and push people.
Yeah.
And in the end, we realize that when it comes to being at places where they represent our people, our community, where decision-making spaces, women disappear. They are not there. Yeah. People don't appoint them, and if they appoint them, if something changed, they're the first one to go out of the door, while what they bring, what they know, their experience is capital to make what we need for our continent. So I would like you to speak to that, about your own experience of being in executive position, because you've been, not only now, but with the Children's Hospital, so in the philanthropy world, but even before that, in government and so on.
What time do you have?
Hey, we have all the time we need, because this is the question right now that we're dealing with. Today even here, we're talking about why aren't women appointed, and people are telling us, we get people who have the capacities, and we're like, women have the capacities. And then people say, it doesn't matter the number of women you have, people will take care of whatever needs to be taken. And we're like, no, representation is a necessity. And it's not just to look nice, it's about what people bring in. And of course, we know that it's difficult. It's painful when you are a woman in those spaces, especially when you are a woman almost alone, or it's just a few of you in these spaces.
I think being a woman alone in spaces is something that probably it's just in my nature sometimes.
Being that lonely woman somewhere.
I know. When I offered to write something, I called it Open Earth and Black Roses. And the roses represented myself at high school with my English teacher calling me a rose among thorns.
All right then.
Because I was the only girl in the classroom. For some reason, some weird reason, I was the only girl until the world a rose among thorns. But that has been part of my life for some reason. When we were, after the student protest, and those of us who were finally arrested for student protests of the 70s, that is 1976 student protest, and when we eventually, when the government then decided to try us, 11 of us were tried. and I was the only girl.
11 of you child and the only girl. Okay, and we need to track back. This is Soweto.
This is Soweto.
Soweto,
Yes.
1976.
This is
And when people
Soweto.
speak about the children of Soweto, people
Yes.
rising,
Yes, that's when we
you
rose.
are
And so
the one woman, the one girl
One
in
girl.
the 11 that was arrested.
that was arrested, charged.
Charged.
And of the 11 of us, 5 of us were sent to prison, and I was one of them.
All right.
So this thing of, and I think it probably starts not being very conscious of being a woman.
Yeah.
It probably starts there, and that's, I say, my greatest feminist learnings were from my mother and how she ran our household. My mother always insisted, I have no boys or girls in the house. I have children. You will do what I ask you to do. And you will not tell me it's for girls. And for girls, you will not tell me it's for boys. So somehow we grow up with this woman who did not have any formal education. But in her values, one of the things she valued most was that we see ourselves as girls the same as the boys. That we do not have, as a result, my brothers cooked better than I did. In fact, I learned to cook from my brother because that was where he wanted to be, and he often was the one in the kitchen helping, and we would be doing other things. And that probably kind of dulled my awareness when I'm alone in a room, in a room of men, until something triggers, and I'm like, oh, is it because of a girl? Oh, well.
This is what.
Forgot that. My mother made me never think I was a girl and therefore could not do things. But, you know, from that time of that activism, going into prisons, coming out of prisons, subjected to the torture that you'd be subjected to, just as any guy would be subjected to. Your activism is not, what is it? It's not contracted. You know, I'm not an activist because I sign a job and that job allows me to be an activist. I'll be an activist whether I have work or not. That's just my perspective of the world. And so with time, when 1994 happened, and 1994 is when South Africa gets what it called its freedom. Of course, now we know it was political, and the economic part was still to follow. 30 years later. And anyway, at that time, I decided and I chose, or I didn't decide quite. At that time, I was working within the NGO sector. And one of the things we were worried about from 1990, as it was becoming clearer that we were going to get a new dispensation, was the capacity of civil society to hold its own. We understood that government would be powerful and would be democratic. But we also understood that it doesn't matter how democratic, any state requires a powerful civil society to hold it accountable.
Yes.
And so we, 1990, 92 through to 94, we're working on legislation that would continue to affirm civil society and civil society action and activities, especially grassroots activities. What was important, South Africa at that time had no less than 40,000 NGOs and CBOs. And we knew that that's the capacity that we needed to hold the new state accountable. We knew that as much as they were all comrades and we loved them very much, things will happen.
Power.
You know, so we worked on that. And when the first administration came up, the issue of civil society was on the table. And I was privileged to be asked to lead a formation of a legislation that would allow money to move from the fiscus to civil society without the red tape of government and without government's control.
Wow.
So it was an absolute privilege. We set it up, and I led the establishment of that legislation, drove it through to Parliament, that it became part of our legislative framework.
Wow.
To have that. So that was sitting within the office of the president, because that issue was that important. It sat within the office of not president. President was Mandela at the time. It sat with President Mbeki. So at that time, therefore, I was in the team that was reporting to President Mbeki, and my particular responsibilities were around government, civil society. Because one thing about President Mbeki, in his administration as deputy president, he really wanted a diversity of thought. So it was important to him. Not only was I coming from civil society and not from the political party, I was also coming from a different tradition. I wasn't coming from the African National Congress. I was coming from the Black consciousness movement. And so building movements was just part of my nature. And he knew that, and his people appreciated that. And many people felt, well, would she be a disruptive force because she thinks differently? And the president at the time is precisely what we need, diversity of thought within the administration at the time. I wish they had kept that thinking. Unfortunately, no. In time, all the good things seem to die. And so that was my taste of leadership in government, because also sitting there, then the portfolio of children fell on me. The portfolio there were 3 portfolios that I had. I had the portfolio on children and ensuring the children's charter and the implementation of the children's charter. Then civil society, government relations, and of course Thabo Mbeki's pet program, African Renaissance. And organizing the state at the time to respond or to be ready for African Renaissance, implementing it, ensuring that we remain Pan-Africanist in approach as a government. I think that, that first administration of South Africa was very much in how we would think as part of the African continent.
Yes.
What contribution we would make as part of the African continent. I'm ashamed that over time it's narrowed and gotten to the point where it is now. People are just, watching for national borders. At that time, we were opening the borders. Opening to all of Africa. And the role of looking after the African Renaissance program was, as the president speaks, we need to look at how are we acting in every government department. And that's why it was sitting with the president to have convenings, which I then had to convene government offices, government ministries. And at that time, the cabinet was not so bloated. So it was easy to organize. And just look after those issues, and so that was the experience that I had in managing, in giving direction at government level or society.
Yeah, that's amazing, amazing. I do want to speak though about the importance of that, you as a woman being there, because we need more women in these spaces.
Yeah.
And how are we going to make sure not only do we have women, but we have the women who actually think differently and will bring something to the table. And I want to come back right after that about the Pan-Africanism, the African Renaissance, because I think that's something very important we need to talk about. But first, pushing a little bit, you've been there. You've been at different level. You've been executive and you've worked. So what and how are we going to do on this continent to make sure women are in executive places, positions?
And the right women.
And the right women.
Because I think for South Africa, the experience has been, the first cabinet, we wanted women, and we held women accountable, the first administration. But this also just says what it takes to have women there. Because what we, as people who were promoting women at that time, were, if we want to promote women, we have to hold them, hold their hands. We have to understand what they see and what's going on and provide advice. So at that time, we had powerful women like Frene Ginwala, who convened civil society platforms with women in government almost every other month, for the women in government to reflect on what is coming across their desks and what role or what they think about what is coming across, and to get feedback from women on the ground what their thinking should be. Because the fact that I'm a woman does not mean that I will fully understand the issues facing women unless we have these platforms. So the first democracy you see, and within Thabo Mbeki's deputy presidency, set gender mainstreaming. So we, as a team of the person who's doing gender mainstreaming, and someone was looking at poverty and poverty alleviation, I was looking at children and African Renaissance. When we come together as colleagues, having discussions with the women we had sent to Parliament was important, because we brought in our experiences on the ground. What worries me most, let's look at South Africa's struggle. There was Robben Island. Even from far away, you will know there was Robben Island. You do know that there was no woman at Robben Island. You do know that there were women political prisoners, which means that we have deleted, erased women's time in prisons in South Africa. We have not promoted the number of prisons, Kroonstad having been one of the main prisons where women prisoners were kept. Mama Dorothy Nyembe, amongst others, spent 15 years in prison. You will not hear her name because she was not at Robben Island. We have promoted Robben Island, and we have made it the focus of attention in everything that we have done. The other thing that, as you see, even amongst my own group, and when I wrote the book I wrote, the intention was not to write my story about my life. That was never the intention. The intention was my worry about how we have erased women in the telling of the stories. And the more the story got more heroic, the less women it had. And I had to, and my worry was I just worried that women were missing. But I was more worried that the next generation will not know what it takes to build a movement and to be in a movement, because they would have been exposed to heroism. So they will have a Nelson Mandela, they will have all the big guys who are written about. But the women who worked with them at the same level would be missing, so you won't know that. But also you wouldn't know the women who opened their homes to us as young people running from bullets, and the women who stood between us and the police, who said, "You won't touch the children before you touch me." I was afraid that when we lose that, when that memory gets distorted, the next generation is going to be a generation that says, either they're going to say it's kind of a Jesus thing. It's too big, I can't do it. I can't be a Jesus woman. He was the Son of God. I can't do it. Either we're going to have that. This belongs to a certain category of people. We need it, and when I write the story, I simplify it intentionally And I'm not writing it to the top people. And I've been happy that the people who've been responding to me are just women.
Yep.
The lady who says, my domestic worker could not put the book down. My mother can't put the book down. My aunt is still reading your book. She says she sees herself in the book. The minister who called me and said, how did you know? You wrote about my mom. And for me, that was what it was about. It was to trigger a memory for all of us to understand that there were less heroes and more people, and that was about building people power. So even as we start, movements that we have now, the understanding of what does it take to build and sustain people's power. And I think for so long as we're writing and telling stories from a male perspective and a colonial perspective, from a male perspective, it will always have heroes because men are heroes. Okay. From a colonial perspective, it will always have the individual.
Yeah.
And indeed, those who've been telling the stories of liberation have tended to focus on the Martin Luther phenomenon.
Yes.
In the United States, and Kwame Nkrumah kind of things, Mandela kind of. So they give us individuals, but they don't put them in context, and they don't give us what made them who they were, so that the next generation understands that if you do become a hero, that's okay, but that's not something you aim for. What you aim for is to work with everybody at grassroots level. Is to get, and as I said to you, I come from Black consciousness movement, and so my whole orientation is about organizing people for action.
Thank you. It's so beautiful for me because really, as we celebrate you as an invisible giant, this is at the core of it.
I didn't even feel giant.
It is, yes, because there's so many giants. We want to say that in our communities, in all of our places, there are giants. But of course, they are not heroes. They are not people, that people have pictures of, etc. It doesn't mean that what they do is not as important and as key. And to me, celebrating you, celebrating Aisha, Fatima Tambay, or, it's about making people understand that there are a lot of people you don't know of. There are a lot of people that are making things happen, that have made things happen, which allow us to be here. And there's still a lot of people patiently doing work that are totally unheroic, maybe, but they make the difference. And that we need to recognize, even if it's invisible. And to me, that is really the significance of this. It's about everyone that that we don't know. Everyone that made it possible for you to be who you are.
Yes.
It's really about every single woman who gave you that capacity and confidence to do what you've been able to do. So to me, that is really the sense of this.
The woman who called me a rose among thorns, and I'm like, okay, all right, I'll take that.
It will take it. I want to come back to the question about African Renaissance, Pan-Africanism. Today there is a whole movement. There's a lot of young people who talk about being Pan-Africanist. They cite Sankara, they talk about different people. But if you had something to tell them today about building this connection among Africans, because we're struggling really as countries. We are instead of opening ourselves and connecting with each other, we are actually crystallizing our borders. We're trying to show of who we are that is not even so old. I mean, you're talking about South Africa being independent yesterday. I mean, how many years is 30 years in the life of a nation? But and the conversation is, our people are older than our nation states.
Yeah.
We have people who have been moving across borders for generations. People who have been taken in, accepted, protected, one side or another, depending on what was going on. We have people who've established themselves here, then moved somewhere else. And now, yes, we have nation states, we have government, we have passport, we have legislation, we have market to protect, we have I don't know what and what. But we don't remember that our people are older than these states. Something. We have to find another way of relating to each other. What are we saying to the young people who say they're Pan-Africanists? What are they supposed to do? How are they supposed to act? Where are we supposed to go? Including these new governments that we have.
I do think that being a young person in Africa today demands a lot. It demands a lot, because their struggle is not as clear as our struggles were so many years back.
That's true.
Things look right.
Yes.
Yet they're not right.
Yeah.
They all get the tick, 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 tick. They look so nice, but the reality is, we have leaders who have absolute no vision or intention to even build a vision. The leaders that we used to have, who it didn't matter where you were. I grew up on Kwame Nkrumah's writings. I grew up on Nyerere's writings. Deep South, hearing these things, because we forget that the generation we grow up with is Pan-African in its approach. However, the borders are useful for politics, and they're very useful for politicians, and keeping people fighting each other. People would say, there are so many foreigners, and whenever they say foreigners, they make people who look like them. They don't mean any other. They could be, let's take South Africa for example. Almost the entire coastal land is owned by Europe.
Yeah.
The people who own those properties, you can't live there and own property. It's gone. And the foreigner you're worried about is the woman selling 2 potatoes? Oh no, come on. Get real. And the reason is, for politicians, it gives them something to do, and it makes them relevant. And that's why I'm saying, to be a young person today is hard, because actually you do have a fight. Everyone says the entire continent is now free, you are free to go. You suddenly realize the chains have not been removed. You still have to remove the chains. And as you say, you say something very important. We've been here much longer. We've done this better than this. The economy now seems to be directing how we think about ourselves. And it narrows and narrows and narrows, and it's getting narrower. And I think I want to leave it to African young people to rebuild bonds and ties between and amongst themselves. Because that's what's going to help them liberate the continent. At the moment, the continent theoretically liberated, but is far from it. And we're going to need our young people not thinking as South Africans, not as Senegalese. They have to think as Africans. And that's, what would that take? I'm not sure. I think they have a lot to tell me on how they would like to see themselves. They have to see the economy beyond narrow interests. And more importantly, they have to understand that at the moment, many of us are pawns on a chessboard. And the politicians are the players. And unfortunately, their game is a narrow, self-interest game of individual wealth. It's got nothing to do with the rest of us. It's individual wealth in many of our countries, and my own country not being an exception. We need the challenge of young people, not young people asking us how should we do this. We need young people telling us how it should be, because they get to inherit all of it.
Yes.
They get to inherit the debt that we've been collecting.
Yes.
They get to inherit the enemies, the violence, the hatred. It's all going to be inherited by them and their children.
Yes.
And therefore, they are the people who need and must, instead of moving to Europe, they need to come back and give us direction. And trying, and it's not going to be easy because it's a fight. You have the politicians, they're already positioned to pronounce anyone who looks like you but comes from a different country is a foreigner. And you hear young people talking about foreigners, foreign nationals. It always amazes me. It's everyone who looks like that. And yet we have so many foreign nationals in truth who don't look like them, but they don't live where they live. So it's also, and we know it's a resource issue. We know that. And the scarcity model is the model. Capitalism is very happy with the scarcity model. If one more person comes and they will take away your job, they will take away your livelihood, they will do this, they will do that. It's scarcity model. But if you say, if a kid comes from Kenya, they will probably teach a lot of other kids entrepreneurship. There will be better trade and relations between and amongst all of us. I think we have to give it to them. I think they have to give us direction and tell us where to stand and how to stand.
Wonderful. We'll be listening to young people to tell us what to do, where to go. Definitely. Anything you'd like to add?
No, except that I have faith. I have faith in our youth. I have faith that our young women are coming up, and they're coming up given what my generation has created. They have better chance of fighting patriarchy, and patriarchy comes with all kinds of other things. The colonial rule we are trying to fight is going to be fought by them as they understand better how to fight back. But I have faith in, I do work with a great deal of young people. Like I said, most of our artwork comes from them, the film, the production of the films we have, the storytelling is driven by young people. So that just gives me faith. The only time I feel sad is when they ask the question, what should we do to come into things? And I had to continue saying, listen, my child, listen carefully to me, because I'm not going to say this again. Power does not open itself up. No one is ever going to give you power. You will take it. So long as you understand that taking power is a fight and a battle, then I know you are ready for battle. But for so long as you're standing outside and say, please let me in, it won't happen.
Thank you. Thank you, Sibongile Mkhabela. Thank you so much.